You're listening to the April 7th, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. The Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Hello everybody out there, I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. As always on this podcast, we bring you the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions from the past week based on Surfwatch Labs data. So I'll jump right into it and throw it over to Matt for the top cybercrime event from the past 7 days.
Coming in at number 1, we have the cybersecurity event that many people are dubbing the Panama Papers. A law firm in Panama is at the center of one of the biggest data breaches ever. Mossack Fonseca, a provider of offshore companies with dozens of offices all around the world, as Jeff has given me a thumbs up in the background for saying that right.
That was a good pronunciation, Matt.
Thank you. Had this law firm had 11.5 million documents stolen, totaling 2.6 terabytes of data. The breach has sparked a global debate around the financial corruption of politicians, business leaders, and other high-profile figures who may have used unethical practices in order to shield their wealth. This is something you hear about quite a bit. More than 140 politicians have been named by the news outlets, including leaders in Argentina, Ukraine, Iceland, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Russia. A large coalition of news organizations from around the world has been pouring through the leaked emails, PDF files, photo files, and excerpts provided by an unnamed source. The data covers a period spanning from the 1970s to the spring of 2016 and mentions approximately 214,000 companies. Now, this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
This is a big oops.
You're talking about 4 decades, essentially, worth of data. And from what I read, there was hundreds of different news organizations that have really coordinated over this leak just because it's so big. And the original, I think it was a Swedish newspaper, they said that they pretty much have the first couple of weeks of stories planned out. So I think this was on Monday this happened. So you got to assume they already got stories planned for next week and probably the week after. So I think new revelations are going to continue to come from this huge cache of 11.5 million documents. We should mention, though, that there is some legitimate reasons to have these shell companies. And the founding partner of the firm, Ramon Fonseca, he said that the firm basically specializes in setting up these offshore companies, and they said that it had broken no laws and that all of its operations were legal, and that it has never destroyed any documents or helped anyone evade taxes or launder money, which are a lot of the accusations that are coming out of this.
Yeah, and there's been some other developments immediately following this news of this breach. There was an estimated 22,000 protesters that took to the streets in protest.
That was in Iceland.
Which
is amazing because there's only 330,000 people, I believe, in Iceland. So You're talking not quite 10%, but
that's
a significant percent of the population.
And stemming from this breach, the former prime minister of Iceland stepped down, and a new one is being appointed. So a lot of turnaround and backlash from this already.
I think that was Iceland has probably saw the biggest, I guess, political upheaval over this. But just to get kind of back to the cybersecurity side of things, because there's a whole lot of political stuff and a lot of business leaders that were implicated in this breach. What happened was, initially the reports that we were seeing was that it was an inside job, a lot of speculation that this was an inside leak from this anonymous source. But at least according to the founding partner of this firm, they did an interview with Reuters a few days ago, and they said that they ruled out that it's an inside job, that this is not a leak, that this is a hack. And they said, we have a theory and we are following it, but they didn't elaborate on what that theory is. So it'd be interesting to see how this hack took place, assuming it was an external actor, not an inside job. And then one other interesting point, just to bring it back to the, I think most of our listeners are from the U.S., so the U.S. focus. In the first few days, there really wasn't any information about people in the United States in these stories that were coming out. But just today, I think it was USA Today, they wrote an article saying that now there are the names of hundreds of Americans that have surfaced in these recent articles from the Panama Papers, including a handful of U.S. businessmen accused or convicted by U.S. authorities for ties to financial crimes or Ponzi schemes. So that makes sense. If you're running a Ponzi scheme, you're probably doing a shell corporation evading taxes too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see the future barrage of news items that are going to come from this. It'll be interesting to see how all of this finally plays out, and kind of to see what's going to happen to the law firm too, to see what kind of repercussions are going to come from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to me, I think this is probably going to play out a lot like the Snowden leaks, and just there was this huge cache of documents. You had different news agencies getting together. They're planning out how to trickle the story out a little bit at a time. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and how it impacts all these different businesses and politicians. And also, I'd be really interested to see more on the cybersecurity side and the forensics of what actually happened. But moving on from that, we have another pretty big breach that happened. But of course, it didn't get much attention because everyone was talking about the Panama Papers. This involved Turkish citizens. There was a massive cache of data that appeared online containing the personal information of almost 50 million Turkish citizens. Now, to put that in context, Matt, there is, from my quick Google search, 80 million people in Turkey. So,
wow.
that is more than half.
Yep.
This information was hosted on a Romanian IP address, and it contains a 1.5 gigabyte compressed database. And hundreds of people have already accessed the information. It's unknown who is behind this attack or what their intentions are. However, there's evidence suggesting that the hacker appears to have something against both the Turkish president and Donald Trump, just based on what the hackers have put out there. So the specific information is just general personal information such as names, parents' names, gender, city of birth, birth date, ID registrations, and full addresses. So a good amount of information there.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when I was reading this article that it's amazing where you see Donald Trump's name pop up. Number one.
You can't escape him.
We can't stop. We're going to talk about Donald Trump a little later in the podcast. But the Turkish government, pertaining to this breach, they're arguing and they're downplaying this leak and saying it's an old story. And they're arguing that this data had actually been first leaked in 2010. However, critics are saying that the data wasn't actually posted online in a decrypted form until this instance. And this is what the Turkish communications minister had to say about this. This issue is brought to the agenda from time to time. It is now being served like a news story. These outdated reports are not newsworthy. So whether that's, without being able to really investigate into it, who knows what's going on? But, here's what you need to know. Right now, there's data out there accessible on the internet for people to see information on these Turkish citizens. That's the important thing.
And a huge amount of Turkish citizens.
A huge amount, yes.
Huge!
Huge! Moving on to number 3, and this has been quite the trend this year so far. Just looking at Surfwatch Labs data, we've seen this happening quite a bit. We have more hospitals that were hit with ransomware attacks. Since the highly publicized ransomware attack of Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, multiple healthcare facilities have experienced similar fates. Most recently, San Diego's Alvarado Hospital and Indiana's King's Daughters Health Hospital have suffered ransomware attacks. Not a lot of particulars were given. It's really more just, here are more hospitals that are being attacked with ransomware. And this is becoming a pretty big concern and a huge trend right now by cybercriminals using ransomware to not only target companies, but more specifically hospitals. This is a definite trend that we have witnessed through our data.
Yeah, and I think the top trending target for the entire week based on our data was this MedStar Health Network. So they had a big ransomware attack that everyone was talking about last week, and that whole event seems to now be over. I saw an article just this morning basically saying that everything's now, all the systems are brought back online, and MedStar Health says that they did not pay a ransom. So that was kind of interesting. Everyone was wondering if they would pay the ransom or not. And just wanted to mention, if you're interested in learning more about hospitals and ransomware, we had a conversation with Arbor Network's Dan Holden, who's the director of ACERT over there. And we talked about this MedStar attack and the healthcare industry and ransomware attacks and all that. And that's on our other podcast, the Cyber Chat, the last episode, which we posted on Tuesday.
Yeah, and according to a lot of our research, there's been 3 ransomware variants that have stood out this year. We have Locky ransomware, which is a very new ransomware variant that was discovered not long ago. Key Ranger, which is gained a lot of notoriety because it involves Apple, and it's the first successful ransomware to ever infect Apple OS X. And then we have TeslaCrypt, which has been widely regarded as one of the main ransomwares. It evolves very quickly, and it's used in a lot of attacks. So that's what's trending. And what's also interesting about this is I think one of the trends that we're seeing here, when we look back at Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, they actually chose to pay the ransom. And it wasn't your typical, if you follow us when we talk about ransomware, a lot of times the average ransom demand is anywhere from like $300 to $500. Well, Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center paid $17,000 to get their information back. And I think that set a really bad precedent for hospitals. I think you could argue that may be one of the reasons why cyber criminals are targeting hospitals so much.
Yeah, and I remember when we first talked about that I think that was in February on the podcast, we kind of speculated, hey, is this going to set a precedent? And we've seen a lot of ransomware targets.
Yes, we have.
Moving on, we're going to go back to our favorite politician, Donald Trump.
Favorite politician. We'll
like
that.
You were saying, he comes up everywhere. We're only in our 4th story of the first segment here, and we've already mentioned him twice.
He's been mentioned twice.
So the Trump Hotel collection, you might remember that they were breached previously, had a point-of-sale breach. Well, Brian Krebs wrote a story this week saying that this hotel collection, which includes about 12 or maybe 14 different properties, now they may be dealing with a second point-of-sale breach. So here's the quote from Brian Krebs about the breach. He said that sources said they noticed a pattern of fraud on cards that were all used at multiple Trump Hotel locations in the past 2 to 3 months. And these include the Trump International Hotel New York, Trump Hotel Waikiki in Honolulu, and the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Toronto. Yeah, and the previous breach that we were talking about, the Trump Hotel collection acknowledged in October of 2015 that they had suffered this year-long data breach. So now, obviously, the investigation is going on the second data breach, and we don't know if all the properties are affected or just the ones that these sources told Brian Krebs, but I'm sure that's going to continue to play out. And I'm actually curious to see if this pops up like in the political news, just because everyone's talking about Trump. Is this
right
awareness of this breach at these hotels just going to get spread just because it's the name Trump and everyone's got to talk about it?
Yeah, it's gonna be front page New York Times or something. Even more curious, since we're talking about Donald Trump, and we kind of have to because it's a trending target. Not long ago, we talked about Anonymous, and they had planned this campaign against Donald Trump. It's supposed to take place April 1st. So
did anything happen?
That's what I was going to ask you. I don't recall hearing anything. There was that minor they claimed to have disclosed some of his information, like his social security number, but it turns out that was actually leaked years ago.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People I've interviewed always said if you have to announce a data breach ahead of time rather than just do it, or announce a cyber attack ahead of time rather than just do it, it's probably because you can't really do much and you just want to drum up some publicity that way. That kind of sums up the whole anonymous Trump thing to me.
Yeah.
Because, we read the news every day.
Not a word.
I don't remember seeing a single article about Anonymous and Donald Trump.
No. I did see, Anonymous, that today they're scheduled to do their annual Op Israel stuff.
Which is,
which again is like...
Take down, Grandma Betsy's bakery, cupcake bakery website.
I'm going to take down Grandma's little pie shop over here.
And then they'll put out a video saying, we disrupted over 1,000 targets.
Yeah.
Even though it's all nonsense.
Well, you guys will read about that, I'm sure. Coming at number 5, we have the V-Bulletin forums were hacked. Last week, the online domains vbulletin.org and vbulletin.com were taken offline for maintenance. When they were back online, all users were asked to reset their passwords to access the sites. It was confirmed later that the maintenance and password reset were due to a data breach. Hackers were able to compromise the servers of vBulletin, but it's not clear who the hackers were or what they were after. At this time, it is not confirmed whether any information was compromised in this attack. Now, I went back through today and tried to find some type of update. There hasn't been anything. I do know that one of the reasons this might have trended a little bit was that vBulletin was hacked a couple years ago as well. Their servers were taken offline. So it just a reoccurring attack and made some news.
Moving on to our top 5 advisories, cybercrime advisories from the past week. One of the biggest ones this week, we have a new ransomware. Seems like ransomware is just, like Matt was saying, looking at our data, there's just been a huge spike in chatter around ransomware. Just going back from January 2016 to March 2016, it's like more than tripled, I think, according to Surfwatch Labs data. And I know that you, I believe, put out an alert for Surfwatch Labs customers about this powerware ransomware. So I think I'll let you explain this, Matt.
Yeah, and this is a trend that we're seeing. There's been for future alerts, we have more newer ransomware variants that are coming out. It seems like every week there's at least one or two now. It's definitely trending, definitely becoming a big epidemic is what I'm going to call it. This powerware ransomware, it's a new fileless ransomware family, and it was detected late last week, and it uses an uncommon delivery system. This malware is delivered through macro-enabled Microsoft Word documents, and this is a pretty common attack vector. However, this ransomware separates itself from others by no longer writing malicious files to disk. Rather, it uses PowerShell to perform its operations, which allows the malware to appear as a legitimate computer activity. And that makes a lot of sense. We talk about one of the things that a lot of these malwares do when they evolve is make it harder to detect. So that is very much in line with evolutionizing.
Evolutionizing, that's a good one, right? The evolution of ransomware?
Evolution of ransomware, thank you. I have a sinus infection, people. I'm having a rough day, and I'm just kidding. The powerware ransomware goes one step further and also targets tax return files created by tax filing programs. This can cause many problems, obviously, for users and organizations that are required to house tax records. Tax records are recommended to be held for at least 3 years after filing because the statute of limitations for the assessment of taxes and refunds runs for this period of time.
And I think on our last podcast we did, or maybe it might have been a couple ago, but I know we were talking about how Microsoft has now put out new ways in Microsoft Office 2016 to stop these these malicious macros in these Word documents or other Microsoft documents. So just if you're worried about that attack vector, which you probably should be based on all the data we're seeing
right.
and the people we've interviewed, there is a new setting in there. I believe it's called block macros from running in Office files from the internet. So you can block just macros coming from, like outside domains and stuff rather than, I think previously you could block them, but you had to just kind of do a blanket block. I don't know. I've never used this feature myself, but from my understanding, you can now be a little more, you can better control now what you want to block in terms of those malicious macros. Yeah, and then continuing with this ransomware theme, I know you guys are probably sick of hearing about ransomware, and I am too, but it's just such a big problem now. U.S. and Canada have now issued a ransomware alert, and this follows a stream of recent ransomware attacks. There's this joint alert released from U.S. and Canada. So this alert includes several bullet points on how to avoid ransomware, what this type of malware is, and provided a brief statement about paying ransoms. They said, paying the ransom does not guarantee the encrypted files will be released. It only guarantees that the malicious actors receive the victim's money, and in some cases, their banking information. Now, it's funny they say this because there was a story recently, I don't know if you remember this, Matt, like one of the FBI guys was quoted as basically recommending that sometimes you pay ransomware. Well, apparently that didn't make some senators, I think it was either senators or congressmen, were basically saying that the United States government is officially endorsing, paying cyber criminals.
Yeah, right.
So the FBI kind of backtracked on that a little bit.
They came out with a new official statement, and their stance on it has now officially changed.
And just to kind of reinforce why we keep talking about ransomware, I was at a talk recently, and there was an FBI agent there, and he said that this is the year of the ransomware, and then he clarified, actually, it's probably going to be the decade of ransomware, he said. So he's probably right about that.
Coming in at number 3, we're going to talk about Joomla and WordPress. Hackers are abusing the jQuery JavaScript library to inject malicious code into WordPress and Joomla domains. To date, more than 4.5 million known infections have occurred through abusing the JavaScript library, and around 70 million fake jQuery scripts have been found. Here's a little information from Avast, and this is a quote they provided. A particular attack method, which has surged in popularity over the past few months, includes the use of a fake jQuery script injected into the head section of websites powered by the WordPress and Joomla content management systems, leading to a web of infections supported by compromised and malicious domains. So far, the attack has been observed in North America, South America, Asia, and parts of Europe.
And I don't know if this is related to this particular vulnerability, but I saw a story just this morning. I believe it was on CSO Online. They said that on Wednesday afternoon, someone on Twitter was offering access to the LA Times website.
I saw that.
For anyone who wanted to purchase it. And the LA Times responded, I believe just today, and they said that it was a vulnerability in WordPress security that was brought to their attention. And they said the Los Angeles Times uses WordPress to manage its events.latimes.com subdomain, and our technology team quickly worked to identify how our relevant sites might have been impacted. So we don't know what that vulnerability was. They didn't explain, but just thought that was worth mentioning. Moving on to our number 4 advisory, we have this extension reuse attack. So there was a recent Black Hat Asia event, and there was 2 security researchers there, one from Boston University and one from Northeastern University, and they disclosed a new attack vector that exploits how Firefox add-ons currently function. And they're calling this attack an extension reuse attack. So essentially, the researchers were able to create a, quote, evil extension. And this extension does not require access to sensitive data to run, and it also does not appear to be malicious. However, due to the way Firefox structures extensions, once this evil extension was installed, it is then able to exploit vulnerabilities in already installed add-ons and force them to execute malicious activity. That's why they're calling it extension reuse, basically using one extension to go to the next. So the attackers can actually utilize multiple different add-ons to create sophisticated attacks, or they can just use a single extension for simple attacks. They could, for example, redirect a user that visits a certain URL to a phishing website, or automatically load a web page containing a drive-by download exploit. Currently, the attack is only a proof of concept, and to my knowledge, there's no extensions in the Firefox extension store that utilize this attack method. But it's just something you should definitely be aware of, because now that it's out there, people could try using it.
And our number 5 top trending advisory has to do with the Magnitude exploit kit, and it has a new feature. We don't talk about Magnitude. Normally we talk about Angler and Nuclear and Neutrino.
Yeah, Angler's just been, all the articles I've seen and all the data, Angler's just kind of taken over the market and really dominated.
Oh, yeah. In an attempt to join the ranks of prominent exploit kits like Angler. I don't know how I sounded there. Did I set this up right, Jeff?
I'm excited to hear what's coming next.
A quieter exploit kit known as Magnitude has added a new feature, fingerprinting. Now, if people don't know what fingerprinting is, it's a technique that eliminates non-genuine victims and it targets legitimate ones. So it's just like a sorting system, so it actually targets legitimate victims. The Magnitude exploit kit malvertising campaign has inspired targeting adult, torrent, and streaming sites. That's pretty common. There is a bullet list that was provided. A lot of it's just, I'll you know what? I'll go through them quick, Jeff. We got drtuber.com, newvid.com, justporno.tv, telecinco.es, seriesblanco.com, divxtotal.com, extratorrent.cc, and that's the list. So if you, for whatever reason, are visiting one of those, stay away.
I'm actually really curious what seriesblanco.com is. I almost want to go there now.
I know, right? Well, see, that's why I was hesitant to read it. Or maybe just because I didn't think it was that newsworthy. I'm not sure.
Now we'll move on to the trending lawsuits, settlements, and other legal news. Run through the top 5 from the past week. Everyone's probably sick of hearing about encryption and the FBI and Apple, but there's a couple of developments we should mention really quick. First of all, that lawsuit between the Apple and the FBI is now over because the FBI has actually managed to hack the shooter's iPhone 5C. Apparently, according to FBI Director James Comey, he said that the tool that they purchased from this third party to get access to this phone only actually works on the 5C running iOS 9. So he said it's just a narrow slice of phones that they can get into. With that going on, another interesting aspect with this encryption is Reuters put out an article today saying that possibly as soon as this week, there is expected to be draft legislation introduced around this, basically like an encryption bill. And this draft legislation is from Senators Richard Burr and Dianne Feinstein, and they're both on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So what this bill will do is give federal judges broad authority to order tech companies to help the government, but it doesn't spell out exactly what these companies have to do. And I believe there's also could be civil penalties involved, but it doesn't spell out what these specific penalties will be for not complying. So there's going to be this bill coming out. Now the question is it going to actually get anywhere? There was news this morning that the Obama administration is deeply divided on this encryption issue, according to sources that were quoted in Reuters. So it sounds like the Obama administration isn't going to support this bill. You have an election year. You have gridlocked Congress. So,
maybe in an election year to save, possible taxes, we'll just lay off Senate, Congress, and everyone, because they don't do anything anyway. So let's just save no. But honestly, one of the biggest takeaways, you can kind of tell it's a trend you see. Anytime the government starts talking about cybersecurity, it is just a mass of crap. I mean, it is just, nothing gets done. It's confusing. No one knows exactly what's going on. Or, or even in this case, it's like you said, it's an election year, so nothing's probably going to get passed anyway. It's just, there's no wonder why there's tension between the tech community and government for the most part. Because it's just, every time they get involved or try to do something, it's just crap.
Well, it's interesting because you have this gridlock going on in terms of if they're going to do anything about it, or even if you could argue whether they should or not. But then at the same time, WhatsApp on Tuesday, they introduced full end-to-end encryption, and they have over 1 billion users. I mean, I've never used it, but apparently I'm missing out.
Yeah, right.
So these tech companies, they're continuing to push encryption and get encouragement from their users and other people, even some government officials saying that they should do that. So I think eventually at some point there's going to be a showdown. We kind of got teased with the showdown and then between Apple and the FBI, and then it went away. And now we're getting teased with this legislation, which probably isn't going to go anywhere, honestly. But at some point in the future, there's going to be something, because the problem's only going to get worse from a law enforcement perspective.
Right. We'll wait and see. Coming in number 2, we're going to talk about Lamps Plus, our favorite store.
Everybody loves lamps.
Everyone loves
I love lamps.
I love lamp. Brick, are you just saying? Anyway, an employee at the Redlands, California Lamps Plus store has filed a proposed class action lawsuit in response to having his W-2 information stolen and a fraudulent tax return subsequently filed. In February, Lamps Plus was the victim of a phishing attack that impersonated a Lamps Plus employee and requested company W-2 information. Another trending attack that's happening right now.
Yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit this year.
According to a letter sent to company employees, the response to that email resulted in the criminal obtaining copies of your W-2 income and tax withholding statement, along with those of every other employee who worked for us during 2015, end quote. The lawsuit claims the company's approach to maintaining the privacy of plaintiffs and class members' personally identifiable information was lackadaisical, cavalier, and reckless.
It's funny, no one ever uses the word cavalier but it shows up all the time in these lawsuits.
Yeah.
Lawyers just love throwing cavalier out there.
It's that law jargon, apparently. The lawsuit alleges negligence, breach of implied contract, violations of California's consumers' records and unfair competition laws, invasion of privacy, and negligent violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Moving on to another legal item, we have Anthem. They're currently undergoing this whole legal battle over their breach. And this was kind of an interesting ruling. Apparently, Anthem wanted to be able to access former customers' computers, and the judge told them no.
Okay.
So, to explain, basically, Anthem wanted to determine whether identity theft and these other forms of potential harm that are facing the plaintiffs is actually tied to its data breach or due to malware or other things that are embedded on people's personal devices, computers, tablets, smartphones, things like that. But the U.S. District Judge denied their motion, telling them that, quote, it's ironic that the defense was seeking discovery of the plaintiff's personal information when the core allegations of the plaintiffs is that defense failed to protect them from damage to their personal information in the first place.
It's pretty legitimate.
Yeah. Anthem's argument is that this attack was state-sponsored, as a lot of people are saying it was China that was behind this attack. They're building a big database of different people. So they're saying that if it's a state-sponsored attack, obviously they're not selling that stuff on the dark web markets to make a few bucks. They're using it for other purposes. So it doesn't make sense for them to be sued over things like identity theft. And they're saying it's probably from another attack or another malware, things like that. So the judge said that he saw value in this request, but ultimately ruled in support of the plaintiffs because he argued that basically by giving Anthem access, it would produce a chilling effect. He said that if future plaintiffs knew that their computer and their phone might be taken, it might prevent them from bringing such claims. That was pretty interesting, I thought.
That is pretty interesting. Coming in number 4, we're going to talk about Intuit. In April 2015, a class action lawsuit was filed against Intuit, the makers of TurboTax, claiming that a spike in tax fraud was due to poor security practices and that the company did not do enough to inform customers when their information was used for fraudulent purposes. This week, Intuit filed a motion to send the case to arbitration. The company cited its end-user license agreement, in which the class had agreed to arbitrate the disagreement. Arbitration plaintiffs' claims fall within the scope of their broad, valid, and enforceable dispute resolution agreements with Intuit, and they have presented no grounds on which to otherwise invalidate them. And this is what Intuit argued in support of sending this to arbitration. If there were any doubt as to whether the claims fall within the scope of their arbitration agreements with Intuit, which there is not, federal law requires any such doubt to be resolved in favor of arbitration.
Then moving on to the final legal item for the week, we have Tennessee has amended their data breach notification law. The governor of Tennessee has signed into law an amendment to the state's breach notification law, and this is going to go into effect on July 1st, 2016. And the interesting thing here is that National Law Review, they wrote an article about this, and they said that Tennessee will become the only U.S. state which could require notification of affected individuals following breaches of encrypted information. Currently, all the other state laws say if the information is entirely encrypted, you don't have to notify. So that could potentially be interesting because if you have to do it in Tennessee, I wonder if we'll get wind of more data breaches that are encrypted, because obviously if there's Tennessee residents involved, they're going to have to report that breach to them. So I'm interested to see how that plays out in the future. But they also noted, the National Law Review did, that the bill does not amend the requirement that a breach must materially compromise the security, confidentiality, or integrity of the personal information subject to the breach. So essentially what all that jibber jabber means is that even though they're required to now notify residents of a breach involving encrypted information, if there is only a remote possibility of harm due to that information being stolen, they could still possibly get around having to do the notification. So that was the big piece of that. And then another small item, the amendment also requires organizations to notify Tennessee residents within 14 days of the discovery or notification of the breach, unless law enforcement says otherwise. So if you do business with anyone in Tennessee, you should be aware of that.
Yeah, that's actually, not 14 days after discovering a data breach. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I should clarify, the National Law Review article, they said 45 days. And I read a whole bunch of other articles that said 45 days. But then there was one or two that said 14 days. So I went into the actual text of the bill on the Tennessee government website, and they say 14 days in the bill. So I'm like 95% sure it's 14 days. I tweeted at National Law Review to see if they could clarify where they got the 45 days number from, but I'm pretty sure it's 14 days.
Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting when you read these. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's interesting that when you read the news, you kind of see one person makes a mistake and it gets amplified and repeated. And maybe it's me making a mistake and amplifying and repeating the 14 days, but I'm pretty sure it's 14.
Yeah. Well, I think you did some extra research, so that makes sense. 14 days from what you're saying, that from what your references are, that sounds accurate.
All right, now moving on, we'll wrap up the podcast with the funny story of the week. Did you find anything this week, Matt?
I did, and I gotta say, I don't know how I missed this story, but we gotta talk about it. A couple weeks ago, Microsoft issued an apology over racist and offensive tweets from its Tay AI chatbot. For those that have no idea what I'm talking about, Tay is a millennial-inspired artificial intelligence chatbot that was unveiled by Microsoft a couple weeks ago. It is supposed to talk to people on social media platforms such as Twitter, Kik, and GroupMe, and its purpose is to learn from these conversation tweets, which were pulled by Microsoft, referenced Hitler and a hatred for Jews and Mexicans. The bot also solicited sex and blamed President George Bush for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In total, Microsoft deleted more than 96,000 tweets.
Yeah, that's not a good PR situation.
No, it's not. These events occurred due to a vulnerability in the chatbot. The chatbot didn't learn these words and phrases. Instead, the people interacting with the chatbot simply asked it to repeat what they had written. So that sounds like a group of millennials had a lot of extra time on their hands.
All right, and that'll do it for this week's Cyber Risk Roundup. As always, the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on. For weekly interviews with cyber experts, check out Surfwatch Labs' other podcast, The Cyber Chat. And for more information on cyber threat intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.